Evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's online community forum. We're back, Straight Talk. My name is Pam Duncan, and I am the President and CEO of Metropolitan Development Council. I am joined here, as always, by Twyna Nobles, President and CEO of the Tacoma Urban League, my counterpart and good friend, and we are partnering for this series of conversations. We are also joined by another good friend, Amanda Westbrook, who will serve as our moderator throughout tonight's conversation. I'll turn it over to you, Amanda.
Thank you, precious Pam. Tonight's conversation is the 18th in a series of discussions where we are diving into different ways that COVID-19 is impacting Tacoma and Pierce County. Tonight, we will have a discussion about how COVID-19 continues to impact our local economy. Tonight, we are honored to have Dr. Ali Modarres. He's asked us to call him Ali for this webcast. He is the UWT Director of Urban Studies and Assistant Chancellor for Community Engagement. Welcome, Ali.
Pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Our pleasure for having you here. Tom Pierson, my friend Tom Pierson, President and CEO of Tacoma-Pierce County Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And Pierce County Council member Derek Young, who has taken time out of his very busy schedule, and we so appreciate that. Welcome, Derek.
Happy to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you for joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Twyna.
Thank you. And I want to let everyone know that we will be here for the community throughout the COVID-19 crisis, hosting a new conversation with a purpose every Monday evening at 5 p.m. The most important message throughout this series of conversations is that there is hope for our community. Our focus is to create space in each meeting to talk about resources and things that we can all be doing to help get through this pandemic.
We would like to take a moment to acknowledge that this meeting is being conducted on the indigenous lands of the Puyallup people.
And I'm sorry, I do not have the slide ready for you.
And that's all right, because we want to gratefully acknowledge that we rest on the traditional lands of the Puyallup people, where they make their home and speak the Lashuti language. Throughout today's conversation, you can submit your questions to be answered by our speakers using the question and answer function in Zoom. We cannot promise that we'll have time to answer every question, but we will make our best effort to get through the list in our allotted time.
Thank you, Amanda. I want to just make a note that as a housekeeping matter and for the security of everyone on this call, everyone in the audience's mic has been muted and we are not allowing everyone to share their faces on video. We have also disabled the chat function, so please submit your questions to our moderator through the Q&A function.
All right, well, good evening to everyone here. We usually get started with a check-in, a spiritual check-in. So Ali, Tom, Derek, to get started tonight, I want to check in with each of you and Pam and Twyna to simply see how are you holding up today. And I'm going to let you jump in as the spirit moves you.
I guess it's me. Well, you know, I'm doing well and I'm very hopeful as well. This has been a moment in our history and with the multiple pandemics that we are dealing with. And the issue is that we all need to learn and move forward. And as we learn and we move forward, I'm encouraged by the fact that we are paying attention to the issues of equity and racial justice, particularly in this country where this is long overdue. And so it gives me hope that we are actually moving in a direction that we should have probably started a long time ago, but never too late to do that.
Thank you, Ali.
Well, I'll go next, I guess. 2020, it just seems like we keep on getting new things thrown at us. And I heard the rapture is coming September 18th, which is Friday. And I'm not sure if that's true or not. It depends on what you believe in. And but I think it has as the challenges have come, it's been wearing, I think, mentally. And I think I heard today 3 million of Washington State folks are in need of mental health help. And the smoke and just the gray skies and everything else that's happening, I think that compounds those issues for all of us. And I can feel it just myself, it's draining. And so I see hope in what we've gone through, but I think it's days like this where we think we're gonna have clear skies, we don't. But my hope is that it will clear on many levels. And I'm excited for what Tacoma-Pierce County has to offer for our residents and our community.
I guess I'll just add that, I have been extraordinarily privileged through most of this, and that, I have my family's health and my own. I'm obviously still working, unlike a lot of people we serve. And so I try to keep all that in mind. But as someone that works predominantly on public health, behavioral health, human services, and related issues, obviously these days have been pretty busy. So I'm tired, but the only thing that's a bummer today is the fact that the outdoors has been my refuge to take a stress break. So obviously not being able to go outside lately, that's not great. So hopefully we get some clearing of the smoke here soon, and things will improve.
This is Tawana, and I am right there with you, Councilmember Young. I was just having a few conversations earlier today and talking about our options are becoming limited. I always like to stay hopeful, but I know that the outdoors and being able to get a breath of fresh air and just having windows open and enjoying some sunshine has been, a lot of the joy that many of us have looked forward to, including myself. And with my 3 kids homeschooling or virtual learning, doing remote learning, my little guy was looking forward to using his breaks and recess to go outside to get some fresh air. So we've had to be a little more creative. But I am feeling very grateful for having a roof over my head, for my family being together, for having really good health at a time when that is at risk because of many things that are stressing us and confronting humanity. So I feel blessed to be here, grateful to have this necessary conversation for a 19th episode of Straight Talk, and also very thankful for each of you for being here and all of our staff who helped to organize this talk today.
And I will jump in and say, first of all, the word for me is resolute. I am just resolved that we will all get through this. We don't have a choice. And I loved, as County Council Member Young was talking about going outside, I just saw a bunch of heads nodding. It's just one more thing, and we will adjust. We'll make the shifts that we have to make. And when we are able to go back outside and we are able to do things, slowly, little by little, we will have an even greater appreciation for those things. And with that, I will just, again, add my thanks for the 3 of you being here, and turn it back over to Amanda to take it away.
Thank you, Pam. And thank you for all of you for sharing those thoughts of how you're arriving here today amidst all of it. Dr. Modarres, or I'm going to call you Allie, as you gave me permission to do. Can you offer up some thoughts about how COVID-19 is impacting our local economy?
Love to do that, but it's a complicated picture, so I'm going to try to paint it in a couple of different strokes and see what happens. So with the arrival of COVID-19, we went into a mode in which was unprecedented at the global level. It's not something that affected one region of the world, it affected everyone. And because of it, there's a larger picture to consider. One of the things that at the premise of this, I have to say, is that COVID-19 showed us the unevenness of the world and unevenness of our region and unevenness of our cities, in which not only one specific sectors were hit, but the specific communities were hit more than others. We saw a lot of the inequities of the past play out in how COVID-19 rolled out. So I'm going to walk us through this to see if I can paint the picture the way it's in my head. If you look at our unemployment filing data, I'm just going to start there. Majority of that started from mid-March and went into May, and there has been a decline since. But the one industry that was hit the hardest was the food and accommodation. And those are the ones with the lowest wages. Those are the low wages, least possibility of working at home that got hit the most. And as we begin to learn something new about ourselves, is that what industries and what occupations have actually a probability of working at home, we are beginning to see a secondary problem that has always been with us. It turns out only the majority of those jobs are high earning jobs that also have that capability of working at home. The second level of it is that working at home suggests that we all have offices and capabilities to work at home. Being a mom with kids, being families with children who have to go to school, a number of other issues also gets in the way in how this plays out. But there are things to sort of begin to sort of say, okay, so if this is the picture, what that really means. It means our unemployment goes into double digit, but also a lot of our small businesses and mid-sized businesses get impacted, as Tom will tell you where the successes and where the failures were in that. These are the kind of moments in which we also understand that how long-term support is important. In other words, you can provide paychecks to people and support paychecks for a few months, but if you can't do it for a longer time, which COVID has plans for us, what that will really mean to housing, for example, what does this really mean to the day-to-day life? And the whole idea of the well-being, mental well-being, a part of it also the capability of being secure in your finances. So if you go to Center for Applied Urban Research at the University of Washington, Tacoma, I have all the data for you, so I'm not going to go through all of that. But there are two things I want to point out that's really important. When you begin to look at unemployment pattern by sectors, I want you to pay attention to how it has impacted the majority of the low-income earning population. The sectors with the highest peaks typically are those. And what is fascinating is that I also look at job postings. And job postings meaning that I'm trying to compare the first 7 months of 2019 with the 7 months of 2020. And when I look at the job postings, almost in every category, there has been a decline in the number of job postings. So it means that also our job market is responding. But the one that is gone up actually is childcare. And one of the things that's quite interesting about this is that we are beginning to see a different kind of set of industries and capabilities coming up. In social and human service assistance, for example, we are beginning to see some movements there. So what really this means is the following. It means that it impacts businesses, it impacts individuals, it impacts incomes, it impacts longevity of working. In other words, can you come back to work? Is this business that you were in or you were an employee in is coming back? So when I read about the Pacific Grill closing or read about Swiss closing, I'm beginning to think about what kind of replacement jobs there are. So here's a positive. I told you I was going to give you a positive side to everything. Perhaps this is a moment for all of us to pay attention to a very important factor that has always been with us, we didn't exercise it, and that is scalable transfer of skills from one to the other. And that's one of the roles that, for example, Chamber of Commerce and EDB and county can play, and city economic development can play, in the sense that people who are getting laid off, not just simply furloughed, not just simply, for a few months they don't have their work. We need to begin to think about how those sets of skills can transfer into the new emerging markets, right? The secondary part of this, which is a positive one, is that even for those who do telecommuting, and they can continue to do that, for the health of our region, how many of them can we help so they can continue post-COVID? What can we learn from COVID that actually positively could be put to use? And one of the things that we are seeing more of is a decline in trips, right? And state of Washington, if you do a state-by-state comparison and county-to-county comparison, we are declining actually in the number of trips, whereas some other states are going back up. So here's a moment for us to begin to reflect how we do that. For Pierce County and its population, which I'm hoping that you will ask me later on about the differential impact on communities of color, is to begin to think about who this helps, and for those who it doesn't help, what kind of movements we can have in order to support our communities. I'm going to stop on that because I've just realized I've been talking for a while.
Well, and you're captivating. I mean, I think we need a 3-hour show because there's so much good information I'm looking at with just amazing panelists. So Councilmember Young, what are you seeing at the county level?
So, as Ali had shown, there is some improvement from where we were a few months ago. I am concerned going forward for a few reasons. One is that sort of exasperation of the existing inequalities that were prevalent throughout the United States, but particularly here in the Puget Sound region and especially Pierce County. We are a relatively poor, more service-based economy, and a lot of that work was the work that was getting lost on us. We're also relatively younger, which created a situation with work from home and with childcare needs that we are trying to address as a county. We're using part of our CARES Act funding to support the childcare industry, to try to build it back up, and also to pay tuition for parents so that folks who work jobs where they simply can't continue to also care for their kids at the same time and get back to work, that they're taken care of. That said, a lot of the income supports that the federal government had put in place are drying up. And that's a concern for me because you could see where, even though we had a lot of furloughs, unemployment, and so on and so forth, our income nationally actually went up a tad during the beginning of the pandemic. And that was because of those bonus checks, basically, that Congress was trying to pad income supports. We're now seeing that has, gone through its course. Congress hasn't replaced it, and that means those folks are now struggling to pay their bills. And then, in terms of a Pierce County specific thing, I mentioned that it was clear we were impacted more by the unemployment. We've had higher unemployment than our peers for a number of years in Pierce County. There's lots of reasons for it. It's not like any one thing, but right now we have been ranking in the top handful of counties. It's clear that this was landing on us pretty hard. And so we'll have to be really focused on trying to get back, because those jobs, as Ali was mentioning, that a lot of folks were able to continue working from home. Those businesses weren't nearly as disrupted, but there were a lot of folks who were working in different kinds of industries that we're going to be having to support. So we're trying to do that through a number of ways. We're using CARES Act funding to support rental and mortgage assistance. We're trying to get businesses back up and running by supporting their own rent and expenses related to COVID. And we've converted a lot of the loans that we were doing into grants. So we're hoping that businesses are able to get back on their feet, get people hiring. But we know in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of people who are hurting, and we're going to need to support them. So those two things are big issues that we're focused on. And then, of course, the ultimate solution here is, the virus is the cause of the economic problems we have. If we don't fix that, it's always going to be a struggle to get businesses back up and running. So we are real laser focused on trying to get those cases down, get kids back into school, get businesses in the next phases reopened. But, you know, we can't do that without the cooperation of the public and some smart public health practices. So that's everything we've been focused on. And, you know, I think, you know, Pierce County, I grew up here, so I know this place. People are resilient, but we have to give them the tools that they need to get back on their feet.
Yes, well said. I believe that we will all heal together, but you've given us a really great landscape with markers that we really need to think about. Tom, we've seen reports over the last few days of long-term restaurants closing. Allie brought up Pacific Grill. We see the Spar. I see a lot of also retail stores that are closing. Tom, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. And then I also, do you expect we're going to see more of these kinds of closures and serious changes to the businesses in the coming months?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. It's rough out there, right? And what you've seen is a lot from the retail sector, whether it's hospitality and restaurants in particular. I mean, I think, you know, you look at some of those favorites that Allie mentioned, you mentioned, you know, those are some, you know, some obvious big ones that that make headlines. But some of the headlines are, you have new places that are opening. There's a new brewery that opened on Pacific. There's, you know, dim sum is coming in, which I'm excited about. And so it's created opportunities. I mean, if you think about this, March, these restaurants were closed. It's now September. And whether you can do takeouts or just, you know, some of the limited seating wasn't enough to really to get your workforce back in place. And so it was only a way that they could limp along. And Councilmember Young had talked about a lot of these things that the county's doing in conjunction with other areas, and those are all great. But the longer this goes in the hospitality, they've had to weather the storm much more difficult or longer than, say, somebody that's in an office, right? So you could move to home, you could do some of these things, and you could continue to do your business, so to speak, from a lot of different places. But when you're retail and need that cash register, need people coming in your cash register, it's difficult. And so getting our community safe, as Councilmember Young said, is important. But that childcare, you know, we just touched on the childcare. Getting our K through 6 in particular back to school is paramount. That cures our childcare issues. You know, I mean, Tawana probably just needs to tell her story of, you know, what she alluded to when she started, you know, being at home, being the school teacher. I mean, half of my staff, they've got K through 6 students, and that causes a change to my office and our employment. And so, you know, I think listen to the ID, you know, the disease modeling in terms of the K through 6. People are doing what they need to do by most part, wearing the mask to keep businesses open, and we just need to do more of that. Will we see more? Unfortunately, I'm sure we will. But I think Pierce County is creative, Tacoma's creative and innovative, and I think people will figure out this new economy, and that's what you're starting to see. It's, you know, nobody expected us to be here in September, and, you know, so how much longer is this going to be? You know, if you listen to somebody in the White House, he says we're going to have a vaccine, you know, by election day. I'm not sure that's quite true, and I'm not sure I believe everything that comes out of there or much, but we won't go there now. But we need to continue to work towards this and work towards this health, making sure we're healthy.
Thank you, Tom. And I misspoke. Thank you, Rob, for catching that. It is not the Spar. I was dreaming about the Spar chips, as I often do. It's the Swiss that went up for auction and makes us all equally sad. Councilmember Young, you are also a board member on the Tacoma-Pierce County Health Board. What kinds of pressure have health officials faced as they try to make prudent health recommendations that might be interpreted as harmful for small businesses in our community?
You know, I think like any health department, we have had some political pressure. And, people are, I always try to explain, as we get emails or phone calls from frustrated folks, their fears and their frustration are completely understandable. In fact, public health itself is sort of counterintuitive because the whole point is prevention. If you wait too long for the bad thing to happen, it's too late to prevent it. So a lot of times it will sound like overkill. That's died down as I think the public's been able to see, what's happened elsewhere. So we have counterfactuals that are, around the country. People saw what happened in Texas and Arizona and other places like that. So I think for the most part, people have started to wrap their arms around the problem and what we need to do about it. The thing that I think has created the most difficulty, and Tom mentioned it, I touched on it as well, is the schools. And that is what we are just super focused on, because there's a couple problems. One is that, it's true that children don't seem to suffer as much from the disease. They can spread it. That much is clear now. And so, how much harm are we doing to a child's life if we keep them out of school, or when the spread is too high, or when they get home and now their parents are infected and they're out of work for weeks on end in the hospital, or God forbid, something worse. Those are all tough trade-offs, and public health is used to dealing with these issues. Trade-offs is kind of their business. So, we deal in, a lot of the programs we've done have focused on early childhood, trying to get, behavioral health services into schools, their social emotional learning. They're aware of all those things. So we want the schools to open as quickly as possible. We recently got into the moderate zone. So we're starting with the younger kids, and they'll begin coming back here soon. The public schools, I believe, we're going to wait until next week. Some of the private schools are already back, but we need to continue to see those cases come down in order to bring the rest of the kids back for in-person learning. So at that point, we'll take a much more localized approach, so that it's not, if we have an outbreak at one school, the entire county closes down. It'll be more focused on those individual cases. So I guess what I would tell people to get a little hope here is that we're getting very close, and we understand, 100% that kids need to be in the classroom. We know how valuable it is for not only their academics, but their development as people. And so we don't want this going on, any longer than anybody else. I guess just lastly, in terms of the businesses, I would actually say there's been as much respect for public health and requests for guidance as there has been some pushback from some businesses. And, I get both cases, but, early on before the mask order, I was actually getting requests from restaurants who had opened, and they were having conflicts with customers over the masking issue. And they were actually asking us to mandate it. And so literally the night before, I had been emailing our Dr. Chen, our health director, to consider one locally, and then the governor imposed one statewide shortly thereafter. So these are all things that everyone's struggling with. The businesses don't want to cause problems. In fact, they, for the most part, have just been tremendous. They do what they're asked, follow guidance, and in some cases are coming up with their own ideas. So I'm pretty pleased with the way our business communities responded to this. I just wish that more of them, we would have been able to save. We've mentioned some of the ones that have closed. There's ones that aren't as much in the public eye that have also had problems. And so, I'm incredibly sad to see some of those go, but hopefully, someday we see something back.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to remind our audience that you can submit your questions for our panel in the Q&A. And I have a couple more questions, one for Allie, one from Tom, and then we're going to open it up to the whole group to kind of jump in and share their thoughts. So, Allie, can you offer us some insight on how the economic impacts of COVID-19 are impacting the communities of color in our county?
Let me start with a national picture for you, and that way you can then connect it to the local level. A study came out of the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities earlier in the summer, in which it looked at unemployment rate and employment among African American population, for example. That was a very difficult report to read because one of the things that their economists predicted that all the gains in the last 10 years for the African American employment rate would be wiped out this year. In other words, we are going to move back the clock on that one. What we are seeing nationally also is that unemployment rate for communities of color has accelerated. And so that's one of the side issues of this is that, as I said at the beginning, the inequities of the past now are accumulating fast, right? And so one of the issues that it will manifest itself, for example, is in the housing. Both Tom and Derek know that one of the issues we have to deal with in Pierce County very soon with the absence of federal support is how we deal with housing and the cliff that's forthcoming. The second part of it that's really important here, who is hired in service economies? And in the service economy is largely communities of color. So what that Pierce County means, I just want to add up these pictures for us. We have a county where service economy is large. We have also a county in which, as Councilman said, that we have young families, and all of that combination comes out to the one particular result, that the impact of unemployment and economic loss is felt stronger among communities of color than others. And so that means, in that sense, that there are a couple of things we have to pay attention to, and that is, how do we restructure an economy that's equitable and resilient, that does not allow this to perpetuate across time? The fact that when I looked at that data from the national study, the fact that is there that says a gain of 10 years will be lost in 1 year suggests to me that those jobs were never in any sense secure in any way, right? They were not resilient type of economies. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is that we are going to see impacts of it on family relationships. We are going to see the impact of it in terms of the health and well-being of children. We are going to see a condition in which we, as a totality of a county or a city, we need to think about it not just as a neighborhood problem, but as our collective issues that we need to deal with. This is not something that's left to one group to deal with. In terms of what happens to any of these service sectors, I think the prolonged nature of what's forthcoming, I think Tom said, well, a vaccine isn't going to be probably here by election time. So the longer this takes, the impact is going to be felt even deeper. So the communities of color are getting impacted in an uneven way. And also it means that the economy that's going to come back, we just have to see how it brings and folds that community back into that economy. I'm hopeful that the creative minds of this region are already thinking about that, about how to do it. I'm sure Tom will tell us how this is being worked out, because we do need that focus. We need to not be thinking about just the entirety. We do need to think about the entire economy, but we need to think about folks who have been impacted the worst level possible and try to make sure that our gain is better than the national picture. Let's make sure that we actually commit ourselves to that. I'll stop on that.
So Tom, as Ali mentioned, what have you heard about some of the area businesses that are owned or operated by people of color in this community?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, it's as I said about other businesses, I mean, it's tough out there and it's rough. And so it depends. You know, I've somebody I know, owns a HVAC company, doing great, right? If you're in the retail sector, not so great. And, you know, so if it's Black owned, brown owned, then you add that the troubles that we had going into this, the disparities. You look at the PPP getting funded, you know, you didn't have a lot of our Black owned and brown owned businesses that were getting funded in the first round because of the finance and banking issues that are prevalent in our community. And so in our region or national, you know, it's not just our community, but you start with that, and they were already there might have been a leg behind before that, and that compounded the issues of going into COVID, or as we started going into COVID, right? And so, but now, good news, bad news. If you're in the DEI training, your business is through the roof, right? And so, bad news is why are we here in 2020 and need to be doing DEI training? But the flip side is you have more white-owned businesses that want to make sure they understand or understanding better today that they need to make sure that they are operating, from a community standpoint, not just because, from their own, individual interests. And so making sure that they're being, fixing the internal as well as their external issues. And so there's opportunities out there. There's the systemic racism issues that are out there continue to compound and hurt those Black and brown owned businesses. But there's winners and there's people that are having challenges as well.
Thank you for that. So I want to open up this next part of our time together for just a group answer. So anybody can jump in and answer this, or more than one of you can share your opinion. So one of the questions is, what might we need to be preparing for in terms of the next phases of economic impacts?
Well, I'd like to jump in here, and this is Tawana Nobles. And a little bit of this was mentioned earlier, where we have to definitely capitalize on this opportunity for businesses and for and employees, entrepreneurs. But now is the time to look at what opportunities exist. I mean, I tend to want to remain hopeful and look for, like, what is the solution, but what can we do? So I know at Tacoma Urban League, we are encouraging and supporting businesses and figuring out how they can, modify that business model to adapt to the changing times. We recently hired a small business support navigator because we know that helping businesses is not just around, or a couple of rounds of PPP. This is, going to be for the long haul as we continue to deal with the impacts of COVID-19 and an economy that's going to, struggle and succeed, and it looks different for everyone. So we want to continue to help our businesses and, employers, employees to be innovative, to rethink the model. We want to connect them with resources and business incubators and funding to help with some of that innovation. But we want to be a support, not just say, think about it another way, but figure out how we can walk with businesses and provide greater access to help with some of those ideas, and to make sure that they feel supported. We are all one community together. And so I'm really excited for the development of our, Tacoma Urban League small business programs and services. And, this new position that is, in direct result of COVID-19 and the needs of our pandemic. But I think we will continue to find success. I mean, Tom said it really well, that some businesses are thriving because of their industry and some businesses are suffering, and we don't want to lump them all together, but we want to work together so that we can continue to support our entire community. But I know we've got this, especially when we talk about businesses and entrepreneurs. I believe there is a creativity and a natural ability to pivot and to make something out of nothing that just exists within that community. And so we want to help to bring those ideas out. And then we want to work with the state and county and federal funding and local funding from our city to help those businesses to be successful. And even with the folks on this call tonight participating in this conversation, I know we'll be able to do it all together.
Thank you, Tawana. We want to jump in and add to what she had to say.
I think what she's talking about is something that requires infrastructure and incubation and a number of other business supports, which I'm sure this region can provide. One of the fundamentals of our region is that we are a high skill zone. In other words, the way I look at Pierce County, which gives me hope, is that we do have the individuals who can actually help with this process. So this is not something one person or one organization needs to do. This is something that everyone needs to do. Right now, I'm sure there are lots of mid-sized cities and lots of regions like ours that are thinking about entrepreneurship. They're thinking about stuff like that. It's just a matter of, the important thing is that to roll up our sleeves and start doing it and engage with that. Minority-owned businesses need stages of support, and like any other entrepreneurship work, I think it's important for us to have this continuity of thinking, not just for COVID-19, but beyond COVID-19. I think this is one of the things that regions need to focus on now. What is the recovery plan, the language used in economic development, and the other one is what's the resiliency plan. So all of that means is that how do we recover and how do we actually make sure that next time, and I'm saying next time when this happens, we are ready for it, not if, next time when it happens.
I agree.
Well, I learned long ago, never go after Tawana because she's always speaks so well. So thank you, Ellie, for doing that. But I do want to kind of piggyback on both of those. One of the great opportunities that Pierce County has is that we do have a diverse set of leaders, and we have trust amongst those leaders. And when I look in this room right here, whether it's Allie, it's Tawana, Councilmember Young, the chamber, PAMELA, we have an opportunity to be able to do the mentorship, be able to make sure that all our community, everybody in our community, all businesses in our community are thriving. And I think it's that intersection amongst all of us that will make that happen. And only in Pierce County will you see that. And I think that's a huge opportunity. When you talk about hope and opportunity, we have it right in front of us. The matter is, and we're willing and able to partner. And I think this time in our life, we need to partner more today than ever. We can't just work in our own silos.
And don't forget that there's a university, there are multiple universities and higher education institutions. We need to capitalize on that as well. Those are assets that usually regions of our size don't have this many of them. So hopefully we can do that as well.
So I want to kind of take what's been said here, and I want to put it through the lens of, based upon what we know, what can we be preparing for in terms of the next economic impact? For instance, let me throw this out. Housing moratorium. What's going to happen with that? So I want to invite you to think forward of all the things that can and cannot happen. I know I'm asking a lot with your crystal balls, but how can we be prepared for those kinds of economic impacts?
Well, if we want to talk about housing, and since you brought it up, I mean, I think housing is a great example of we need to do, we've said it here, right? So I think Allie said it's coming, it's a cliff that's coming ahead of us. We need to look at this differently. State government, city governments, county governments aren't going to have the funding to be able to do this. It's got to come from the private sector. And we have to be able to see what's the private public sector, how can we get more affordable housing within our community. We need a bigger stock of housing, period. It's worker housing. It's making sure that we're not displacing people out of their homes into other regions in the county. We need housing here. And so that's, again, a different conversation than we probably have time for here. But my point is we have to engage the private sector along with the public sector to find ways that we can do that. And again, we have a model, I think, in front of us that we can do that.
Yeah, I guess the thing that I would add to that is that, Tom is exactly right. We need more housing supply in general. And that's been a need, obviously pre-COVID. And a lot of it, frankly, was exacerbated by the big inequities around our larger region. So you had this tremendous economic explosion attracting a ton of jobs up in largely King County. In fact, it was pretty concentrated into just the Seattle Bellevue type area, but they didn't add enough housing to that. And, as I like to joke when I'm at my regional council, housing is where jobs go at night. So you have to have a place for them. Otherwise, you will get that displacement. And we saw a lot of that over the last decade or so here in Pierce County. It just as market dynamics played out, our stock wasn't getting built fast enough. we're next going to see a different problem. And there's a little bit two sides of the same coin, because price is affected by housing supply. And, so we have pretty high rents to begin with. So people have fallen behind on those. And as those moratoriums run out on eviction, we're going at some point to see a wave of increased homelessness if we aren't ready as a county in a city to support those folks. So that's why we've emphasized trying to do rental assistance and mortgage assistance, which is not something we traditionally have done. We've usually waited for people to actually experience homelessness before they can access those dollars. This is a cheaper way of approaching it in these unusual circumstances. So we're trying to get to as many people as possible, but we know we're not going to get to everyone. So we need to be ready for when that wave comes. And, right now it's clear that the federal government's continued moratorium isn't working in most cases. We have one at the state level here. So however long that's going to be in place, that I don't know. And I guess I would just add that, this all isn't going to be solved overnight. Even as Tom joked, the vaccine likely will not be available, November 1st. That's true. There is some optimism from the folks that actually are developing these things that they may have one ready for production. Even still, the maximum production that we've seen in the past for a new vaccine is like 10 million units a month. In a country of 350 million people, or whatever it is, 330 million maybe, that's going to take a large amount of time to roll out. So it won't be we're fixed by the end of the year kind of situation. This is going to drag out for a while. So we'll still continue to feel these effects, and they'll compile on each other the longer it takes for us to adjust. So we have to be ready to be in this for a while, which means don't count on a magic solution coming. We have to deal with the situation as it is.
So Derek, there's a follow-up question here in our chat that I want to pose to you, and that's, will Pierce County be adding additional funding to reopen rental assistance?
So we actually, I should check on this. There may be an interruption that I haven't heard about, but we actually added considerably more a month or so ago. So, and there may be a difference between that. Tacoma has its own program. And so we may be able to help there as well. So, but yeah, as far as I know, that they believe that they were going to be good through the end of the year. That is where the second disruption happened. So the CARES Act runs out in December. Congress has, struggled to figure out next action. And one of those was to extend CARES Act funding at least through the beginning of the year. But as of right now, we have to have all those dollars committed by the end of December. So we desperately need additional congressional action. And that's not just for some of these social services and public health funding that I've talked about. It's for the, business supports that we've put out. It's frankly, for state and local governments. This isn't a red, blue kind of political thing. As you may have heard the message out there. Every state, every local government is facing budget chaos of some sort. So it looks a little different everywhere depending on your funding structure. But if we don't want a repeat of the Great Recession, where massive layoffs from government exasperated the unemployment problem, and if we want to make sure that these services are still there for people, right now, like laying off a bunch of teachers doesn't sound like a great idea, right? So we have to figure out a way to fill those revenue gaps, not increase our pension obligations or whatever else the rhetoric we've been hearing. It's more about funding the services that are necessary.
And as you were talking, I think our person who posed the question rang back in and said the website is currently, it says it's closed. And I'm looking over here at our fabulous tech director, Rob Huff, who has also said the county has currently paused taking new applications to work through a backlog of 3,000 requests.
So that's the issue. They just weren't able to process the applications. So yeah, I will say it this way. I would take that in face value and say that we will be reopening. They believe that they would, be able to commit to the amount of money we already have appropriated. I'm ready to send more if we can get more dollars out. a lot of this is just capacity. It's how much do we think we can get out all at once. So they do have to go through an application process. So that makes some sense. But obviously we want to get that unfrozen as quickly as possible.
And I would like to jump in. There are so many providers in the Pierce County community who have been selected to help with getting that rental assistance out the door. As Rob mentioned, there were like, as soon as it opened up, there were 3,000 households that made application, which speaks to the severity of the issue. And it's just so interesting that this is the conversation that I started with this morning in my first meeting of the morning and the last meeting in terms of economic impacts and what that looks like for housing. And I think we also really have to be cognizant of this, because housing in Pierce County is less expensive than in King County. And if folks are saying that they won't have to commute, then guess where they're going to be headed to? That was something that I heard this morning already. And also just being very concerned about what it's going to look like for the speculative market with folks losing housing, if that becomes if that gets factored in. So I think definitely the housing aspect, the impacts of COVID to housing is humongous.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons sometimes housing is referred to as the mother policy, because it tends to have ripple effect and also manifest other problems as well. I think there's a secondary level to think about, and that is some of our folks who rent out units are not big landlords. They have very few units, and this is their retirement income, or this is their sole income. So there's this multiple dimension of this impact to think about as well. But moving forward, I think we do need to worry about being largely a housing place. And I think Tom and everyone, Derek, I agree with me. We don't want to envision it that way. The issue is that the supply of housing is low. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is that affordability goes out the window when the bid for the housing goes up. In other words, if you have limited supply, the folks who come down to this area to get housing are going to be able to pay more compared to where they're coming from. And so there is this entangled set of policies that needs to be looked at. One is wages, which I didn't want to touch on, but I will for one sec. Wages in our region in Pierce County need to go higher depending on the sectors that we have. And those wages can help us accelerate the economy. But the part that needs to be looked at is that we need affordable housing. We need family, working age, living wage housing. We need full price housing, market housing. We need all of it. It's not like we just need one. And so hopefully as we move forward with the help of county, and I know that leadership of Pierce County are talking about affordable housing at this point and what policies can be put into place, there are a number of ways in which we can begin to see some policy support for housing, including the surplus land, right, Derek, that we need to look at in terms of how to make that available for housing and specifically for affordable housing.
Thank you for that. We've talked a lot about what local governments and officials can do to make recovery more possible, given how much every day is the new unknown in terms of smoke, in terms of Black Lives Matter, institutional racism, individual racism, and also COVID-19. Regarding our current economy, this is a question for everybody who's here right now. What, if anything, keeps you awake at night?
You don't want to ask an academic what keeps me up at night. I worry about everything, so I'll let the others talk about first.
Well, I'll take a stab at this. It's the uncertainty. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities ahead of us, but this uncertainty of where we're at, uncertainty of elections. And that gives businesses, the visibility for capital improvements. It hinders that, which inhibits growth to your business, which means employment. And so those are some of the things. I mean, the racial inequity and areas of opportunities. I mean, those things keep me awake as well. And I think we have some opportunities in all these. I look at infrastructure. How can we, benefit places that haven't benefited from infrastructure? And infrastructure is not just roads and bridges; it's other things now. But I think we have opportunities with all that. But I do, as I've said before, I think Pierce County has the ability to be the lead, and especially when we talk about systemic racism, I think we have an opportunity in front of us. It keeps me up because I think about, I want us to move as quick as possible, but I also understand there's systems that needs to be fixed, and those things take time, and I'm not very patient, but I think we've got some things ahead of us that we can be doing together as a community to grow our community, and not just grow it, but to really grow us together as a united community, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Councilmember Young, what keeps you awake at nighttime?
I was gonna kind of laugh when Allie first responded, because it is sort of everything. Because like I said, when I decided that I was going to work on like public health and justice issues and things like that, I don't think I envisioned having these levels of interlocking crisis come crashing down all at once. But I think that's it, is that each share, all of these different crises are not unrelated. We've actually talked about in public health and had resolutions on this about racism being a public health crisis. That's not just done here locally in Pierce County, but my national colleagues have adopted it as well. It's the same with the issues of, like just general governance. I guess what I'm getting at is its institutions have failed. And a lot of the problems that we have, the trust issues that have been exacerbated by all this, the inability for us to respond to these crises, and I'll throw climate change into that as well. It's sort of the one that it reminded us recently here that that problem hasn't gone away as other more social issues have caught in front of us. So we have to get back to being able to have a functioning social order, and that's both in the governments and the private sector. That's why all these things are kind of coming at once, and I think we let it get out of control. So the expanding inequities that we saw, COVID just exposed the inequities that were already there. And so I think we need to go back and not only say we need to respond to the damage that COVID has done, but it's also fix the things that were a problem before that it just made worse. Because I'm a avid transit rider, and most of the folks that ride transit in Pierce County are not choice riders like me, where I could drive my car to work every day. It's people that rely on it because they don't make enough money for another form of transportation. And so I saw a lot of those folks every day, people that were students or that had behavioral health disorders, that were clearly homeless, or just working wage jobs that were not equitable in terms of the pay. And I think constantly about them right now, because I'm not on the bus as much, and I always wonder, how they're all doing with all this. So, I guess that's what I keep coming back to, is the failures were there pre-COVID. So we have to fix all of that. And that means, like I said, government, and I think you can kind of see a staggering layer of how much government has been falling apart as you go up in levels. That's, local government tends to be the one that kind of functions a little better. But in terms of the way things are going to have to go, it can't just be the government. It's got to be the private sector as well. That's all going to be very difficult because we're talking about massive culture changes that will deal with a lot of this stuff. But I think it has to start with trust. You know, if we can't trust each other, I don't know how we get this fixed. So it has to start with, you know, the people in this room, the people in our community. We know each other better, you know, so we can start bridging those gaps.
Well, the list of things to do are long, as you just heard from both colleagues here. This is a monumental task. My greatest worry is that 2 years after COVID-19, I will be on I-5 and everybody else will be there as well. And that kind of old habit is much easier to fall into the old habits. And along with that, the commitment we are making now in terms of building a more equitable society. And system changes are difficult, and I'm hoping that we remain focused on it post-COVID, post-vaccine, post-treatment, post-next epidemic, post-smoke, whatever it is that we constantly are dealing with these days. But it is really important for us to make a promise not to go back, not to seek the 2019 as a solution to the post-COVID. And for that reason, I think all the material that was mentioned tonight is really important, from housing to health to systemic changes. Everything needs to be looked at and looked at differently. So 5 years from now, we will not all have forgotten this and this become a part of our memory of what happened. It will be really what has changed. That's what I'm hoping for. That's what keeps me at night, keeps me up at night thinking, what if? What if everybody forgets?
What has been the biggest surprise to you in terms of impacts? And then also, what gives you hope? Because we want to end on hope here.
I'll go first this time. So that way they went first. So I'm really hopeful, and I can see hope in that a lot of our cities around the country, around the globe, and around the world are beginning to focus on things that needs to be done. They should have been done 20 years ago, but they're beginning to think about how to engage with that. I am encouraged by the remaining focus on the issues of racial justice. This is something that initially it was, you know, people sort of thought it was going to be episodic, it's going to be continuous. I am actually very hopeful with the 2030 something. They seem committed to every systemic change that we are talking about in a much larger percentages than before. I am encouraged by the fact that a lot of our folks who were in the old-fashioned ways of thinking have moved on and trying to learn. This is a time to learn. It doesn't matter how old we are. We are byproducts of a different time. We all need to be educated. So I'm quite excited to see that everyone is open to doing the DEI work, to doing the kind of the right things and asking the question, what needs to be fixed? What do we need to do to make this better post-COVID? And this conversation isn't all about vaccine. It's about us. It's about how we live, and we have chosen to live and how we need to now adjust ourselves to the new way. So I'm hopeful. I can see the conversations going on, and that gives me hope.
Thank you, Allie.
I guess I'll give it, it's a somewhat, I guess, interesting, but maybe it doesn't have the biggest impact on us in terms of the biggest surprise I had in all this. You know, people sort of intuitively understand that we had a demand side shock. That is the way most recessions seem to happen, you know, that people pull back on their spending, and so, you know, everyone kind of suffers from there. There's a tool that the government, you know, a couple tools that the government can go to, and that's, you know, either monetary policy or fiscal policy, and support it with increased demand. But we also had a supply shock in the middle of this, and people kind of breezed by that. And I was stunned by the disruption in our food systems. You know, at the same time, I was having trouble finding eggs in the store. I hear JT Wilcox's farm in Yelm is giving away egg product because it was gonna go bad, and it was their liquid egg product that they sell to restaurants. And that's when it finally started clicking to me that a lot of the systems that were built up either served one business or the other. it's the reason, in fact, like we all joked about toilet paper in the beginning, it turns out the commercial and the retail side are completely different businesses. So it was just, we were all buying stuff to work at home. And so those disruptions didn't exactly go away though. There's a bunch of second order effects that are happening. And I don't understand exactly what all those ramifications are, or if there's really, I mean, Allie's probably got a better idea than this. I don't know that there's any tool that the government has to respond to supply shock. So at any rate, that's my biggest surprise from all this. The thing that does give me hope though is it's actually not on the government side. I'm still fairly frustrated with the way some of my fellow elected officials have responded to this. But what's been interesting to me is that the people are demanding these things, and that's making my job a lot easier because I can press a little harder because they're seeing people call and write us and on issues that we really haven't heard from them before. So the democracy always works better when the people are demanding the things that need to get fixed, because otherwise what tends to happen is elected officials, they're sort of short-term thinkers, right? They're thinking about the next term and so on and so forth. So get past the problem that's in front of them that's maybe a little uncomfortable. This is forcing us back into the maybe uncomfortable place, but it's the place that we need to be in and need to be dealing with. Justice reform is a great example of that. If you told me a year ago I'd be working this year on some pretty big things that probably need to happen a while ago, I probably would not have believed you, but everyone's on board now. So just as an example, and this is a small one because it's not the, there's a bunch of things we have to do, but the county council passed unanimously an ordinance on dash and body cams for police officers the other day. That was a bill that I had been trying to get passed a few years ago and ran into roadblocks. So the fact that it passed out unanimously with relatively little concerns, that's a really positive sign to me. And that's coming from people demanding change.
So I guess surprise, right? So surprise would be, is Americans actually wear face masks, right? If you would have said at the beginning of 2020, Americans are going to wear face masks, you would be laughed at, right? So we wear face masks now, and they're actually pretty cool. I got my Sounders one, and people have, Tawana's probably got the coolest ones, but she always has the coolest of everything, so that goes without saying. But we wear face masks. And so we're learning as Americans to be adaptive. And why are we doing that? Because we're thinking of other people. We're not just thinking of ourselves, we're thinking of other people. And what I'm hopeful about is a little bit what I talked about before. We've got the people around our community that we have trust. People, it's not everybody looks the same. We got lots of different folks, different cultures, different backgrounds, different, you name it. And we have trust. And that trust is going to build us into the future for a community that is going to look like, be like, act like nobody else. I run an organization that's been around for 136 years. We, for the first time, starting October 1st, we're going to have our lead, we're going to be an anti-racist, seen and do as an anti-racist organization. That's, so there's an awakening, right? I've said this, Pamela's heard me, we've talked, being against racism, I thought was good. I thought that was good. It's not. Today, it's not enough. So there's an awakening. And I think you see that within businesses in our community. I think you see that with individuals in our community. And have we waited too long? Yes. But it's here today. And I'm hopeful that we'll continue to push through that. As Derek said, pass things that we've never thought we would be able to pass. Do things we could never do before as a community and not lose that, continue to press forward. And that's what I'm hopeful for.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said. I want to ask our fearless leader, Pamela Duncan, to close out our time here with some words of hope. And of course, I want to say thank you to all of our panelists, because you are such an example of a heart and a mind connected. So thank you for that. And also thank you, Rob Huff, for all of your genius technical work. And Miss Pam, would you tuck us in for the evening?
Yes. So again, I just want to say thank you to Ali, Thomas, Derek, that's how you are appearing on my screen, for making the time for this conversation. And this was such a very rich conversation. I was thinking, I'm so glad it's being recorded so that it's in the archives and we can always go back. And usually I have a lot to jump in and say, but instead I just had to type Amanda because I just wanted to make certain that I didn't miss anything that you all were saying. I want to say that the biggest surprise to me, and I don't know that I can necessarily make a correlation between that it's an economic impact, but the thing that has been the biggest surprise to me during the pandemic is being places, whether it's a physical space or virtual space, and hearing white people talk about racial justice. And being in physical spaces, I've shared this with a couple of folks, where I would never ever expect to see a sign, Black Lives Matter, in some very remote sections of, the region. And so at first there was a conversation about, well, yeah, they probably don't have Black people living here. But then I thought, actually, that makes it even more heartfelt, because it's one thing if you have people of color in your life and you feel compelled because they are there and you want to make a stance. It's another thing when actually you could just be quiet and you wouldn't have to deal with your neighbors who are not going to be in agreement with you. And I think there is something about the time that we are in now that has been, driven by the pandemic, and then every other thing that has arisen and is compounded by COVID, that gives me hope for us as humans and for humanity, that maybe we can really care about one another and stand up for one another and be kind to one another. So that's my tucking everybody in. I, again, just appreciate your words of wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. So good night, everyone. Thank you again to everyone who joined us. This was recorded and you will be able to go back and review it. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.